Hi there, it's Anna Rosie Duck Designs here. Thank you ever so much for joining me today. Just before Sale-A-Bration comes to an end, sadly, at the 30th of September, I just wanted to share this really lovely stamp set with you, which is a Sale-A-Bration reward. It's this cling stamp set, which is entitled Feels Like Home. And I just really love this because it's got so many possibilities of making some really nice cards. So I thought I would just share a couple of ideas with you. I've used some Stampin Blends in colouring the images, so I will also share with you how I've done that. So without further ado, we'll make a start on the first card. So I've used Cajun Craze. I'm keeping up with this idea I've got going at the moment of just changing my base cards up a little bit, just to add a bit of variety. And we do have some really lovely colours within the Stampin' Up family of colours, so it's sometimes quite nice to just mix it up a little bit. So it's Cajun Craze. You could, if you didn't have that, you could always use a white base card, of course, there's no problem with that. But anyway, I'm using Cajun Craze. Let me just burnish that edge. As usual, my card is 6x8 scored at 4 on the long side, and that is 20x15 scored at 10 on the long side. I'm going to be making the card in the landscape style, and I've got a piece of designer series paper from the In the Wild designer series paper set, and I've cut that at 5 3/4 by 3 3/4 or 14.5 by 9.5. Now quite clearly it has a pretty little crinkled hole in the middle, and I've cut that out using one of the stitched So Sweetly dies. So the very largest die, I've put that in the centre of my designer series paper and then just effectively cut that oblong out from it. And we're going to add our picture. So in effect this is going to be a frame for our picture of this image from the stamp set. Now I've already stamped out the image and I've coloured it, so we're going to be looking at that a little bit later on in the video. I've cut this at, I've got various measurements going on with these cards, so I will double check myself. 3 3/4 by 5.5 for this particular piece of paper, so that it goes within that frame, and that is approximately 8.3 by 14 in the metric. So I'm going to attach that to the front of my card. So what I need to do, track down my adhesive is a good plan. So I need to put some adhesive down the sides of my designer series paper. I need to get this image in first before I then attach the whole thing to the front of the card. So I just wanted to, particularly for this card, I just wanted to use a die cut to sort of make a frame effect, but not essential. You could just cut this a bit smaller and put it on the front of a complete piece of designer series paper, and we're going to do a similar version of that in the next card. So effectively I want this to go down on top of my image, hopefully in a straight line, be good. There we go. Now the great thing with this is, if for any reason this piece of paper is showing over this side or whichever, you can always trim it, but in theory the measurements that I've given you, using that in combination with that die, that should work. But all is not lost. You can always trim anything that is showing on or beyond the designer series paper before you stick it down finally onto the card. So that's what I'm going to do now. I'm going to be quite generous because it's quite a thick piece of card that we're trying to attach to the front of our card. and I'm just going to stick that in the middle. So I've got a little Cajun craze border around the outside. For the inside of my card, I've used this stamp, and again I've coloured it using some blends, which we'll talk about later, and I've cut that particular piece of card at 3.5 by 5.5, so that is 14 by 9 in the metric. And all I'm going to do is just stick that into the inside of my card. Now there are some really nice sentiments included with this stamp set. I'm going to leave mine blank because I'm thinking that this would be a really nice new home card, for example. At the moment I don't know anybody that's moving, but it's sometimes really nice to just have a few cards to hand in the background somewhere that you know that you're going to be able to use at some point. So that's what I'm effectively going to do with this. I'm going to use it potentially as a note card, perhaps as a new home card. So that is it. That is all I'm going to do to it. But you could obviously use any sentiment that you wanted, or indeed one of the sentiments from this particular stamp set. So that was that. Just to pretty up the envelope, I'm going to stick, if I can find it, I'm just going to stick a strip of the designer series paper. I've cut that at 1.5 by about 4 3/4, so it's a little bit longer than my envelope, so that would be 4 by just over 11.5 centimetres. And the same principle is applying with this, as I always say when I stick a strip inside my card. Cut it longer, you can always then trim it. If you just misjudge the measurement and cut it too short, then that tiny gap suddenly looks like a massive big fault in the card. So this way round you're not going to have any bits of the envelope showing. Now my tip, because I've managed to do this twice in the last week, is to have the envelope up the wrong way when I've stuck the piece of paper down. The last time I did get away with it because it was just a thin strip, but this when I stuck one this size in the wrong place, I mean that's just not going to really work. Plus the fact it was upside down, so it was a no-go, that one. So I'm making sure my paper's up the right way, my design's up the right way, my envelope's up the right way, and I'm just going to stick that over here on the side. It's probably only me that will possibly manage to do that, but I thought it's worth mentioning. And I'm just trimming off any excess so that I've got a complete strip of my paper on my envelope with my card. So that's my first design using this particular stamp set. My next design is going to feature Merry Merlot. Again, a colour I like, but I don't seem to use it very much, so nice opportunity to use that. Again, it's going to be a landscape card, same measurements, 8 by 6 scored at 4 on the long side, or 20 by 15 scored at 10 on the long side. For this one, I've used a piece of the designer series paper from the Beauty of the Earth set of papers. Nice autumnal colours, although there is a really pretty sky effect paper in there, which I have used on my ice cream card. But generally there's these type of autumnal colours, that's what I mean. So I've cut that at, as usual, 5 3/4 by 3 3/4, or 14.5 by 9.5. I'm going to attach that to the front of my card, so there's no die cutting with this one. I thought it was nice to just try both ways really. And I just thought it was also nice to be able to just highlight a couple of bits of the design series paper that we've currently got. So that's going to go in the middle of my card, leaving myself a little bit of a border around all of the 4 edges. I've got the same measurements inside of 3.5 by 5.5, which is 14 by 9. And once again, I've stamped the little image on, and once again I'm not going to add any additional sentiments. Same reason as I've just said, I'm sort of keeping these by because they're going to be really handy just for all sorts of occasions. Those times when you find you need a card and haven't really got time to make one, etc. So there we go. I'm putting that in the centre there. Now again, I've cut this rather than doing the larger insert. I've done this smaller one just to give me a little bit more of a coloured border around the card. Because we're using this pretty colour for our base card, I kind of thought it nice to celebrate it in a way and have a little bit more of it showing on the inside. Now for my top, I've got a little piece of basic white which I've stamped my image on. Now I actually went with around about 3 by 5. This finishes up at 3 by 4. Now you could cut 3 by 4 and just stamp your image on. By going 3 by 5, so that's approximately 7.7 by 12.8 in the metric, it's just giving yourself a little bit of space to play with rather than having to be very, very precise and getting that stamp down. It's giving you a little bit of room to play with. When you've stamped your image and coloured it, then you can just trim it down so that it measures 3 by 4, which I'm hoping I've got written down. Yes, 7.6 by 10.2, or 7.7 even. I've got 7.7 going on there and 7.6, but approximately the metric 7.6 or 7.7. But start with a larger piece of 7 by, let's go 7 by 7, 7.7 by 12.8, cutting it down to 7.7 by 10.2. Right, then I've got another piece of Merry Merlot, and I've cut that at 3.25 by 4.25, which is approximately in the metric 8.3 by 10.9. And the purpose of that is just to layer my little picture on top of it. So I've just got a very thin border showing round the outside. So let me stick that to my card. So as I say, I just want a very small border showing on each of the 4 sides, and then I'm going to attach that to the front of my card using some stamping dimensionals. I'm going with 6 because it's quite a big piece of card. In fact, I might be even more generous. I do like to make sure I've got enough stamping dimensionals on my projects. They're not expensive, and I just like to make sure that there isn't any sort of bit where it's a little bit it's unsupported. It does, however, mean I have to take off 9 backs of stamping dimensionals, but it's not as hard as adhesive sheets. There we go. So I'm just going to pop that in the middle of my card. And there we have another version of a card using this really nice stamp set, which can be yours with a qualifying order, which is £45 excluding postage and packing. So I'm just going to do exactly the same with my envelope. Use a piece of the designer series paper. I'm going to leave a little border with this one rather than take it right up to the edge, just to mix it up a little bit, and then just flipping it over. Trim the edges. Push the rubbish to one side, and there we have our other finished card. So that's just a couple of ideas that I've had to as to how I've used this stamp set. I will now just talk very quickly about just some ideas of colouring them. But what I'm going to do is just pause the video and clear my desk a little bit, and then I will be back. So I've got my main stamp here on my block, and I'm using an E block. It's quite a large stamp, this one, and I'm using Memento ink, and because it's such a large image, I'm going to take my stamp pad to my image rather than the other way round. Just makes life a little bit easier. There we go. So I've got my piece of card which I cut at 3 by 5, 3 by 5, which I've now stuck blank ink on one side, so we'll turn that over. It was all going so well. 3 by 5 was, I think we said 7 by 7 by 12.8, and I'm aiming for the middle, but this is where, when I've finished it, I can trim it. So there's my image. So I've gone slightly this way, so I'm going to be taking more off that side than perhaps this side. But this is the point of actually having your paper slightly larger than you needed it. So while I've got the black ink out, I can do a lot of damage with that, I'm going to stamp the inside image. So I'm just going to use a piece of card for that. Now what I found with that's possibly my Memento ink pad might be quite full of ink, but I did find that the first stamp of having just put the stamp into the ink, I just found it was too much ink. So then I thought I'll try a second, like a stamped off version, but I still found that was too much. So in effect, I found that the third generation, so stamping it off twice, worked. So that's what I'm going to do. So once, this is probably quite dangerous, me having ink on my work pad like this, but there you go. There we go. So that's my image. It just gives me still that nice dark outline, but it's not as dark and black as the first and second versions of my stamped image. I'm hoping that's making sense. Now I've used Memento ink because it's a water-based ink, and I'm going to be using it in conjunction with the Stampin Blends, which are alcohol-based, and the water and alcohol don't mix, much like water and oil, so you won't have a problem with getting the Stampin Blends to, they're not going to run into the ink, if that's what I'm trying to say. If you use the StazOn, which is an alcohol-based ink, then that is going to be a disaster when you're using it with Stampin Blends. Conversely, if you use StazOn, which is alcohol-based, with watercolour, so watercolour pencils, that will be brilliant, because again the two don't work together, so you don't have a lot of blending and all your lines getting blurred. So Memento and Stampin Blends, I've got a little selection here, and I'm not going to do this sort of every single leaf is not going to be coloured in. I'm just giving that sort of sense of colouring. If I could just get the top off. I've got some old olive here. This is a light old olive, and I'm going with the thin nibbed end of the blend, and I'm just going to just add a little bit of colour, a little bit of the green, but I'm not literally going over every single element. Now we've got some green down here in this potted plant. Going over this quite gently so that I'm still getting the details of the black ink, the memento ink coming through. Now I've got a little bit of some greenery down here as well as a flower. I'm going to go with a little bit up here because that's a bit like a trailing ivy. I'm making this up as I go along. But it looks like ivy, doesn't it? It's a hanging basket, so we'll go with ivy. I've got a light crumb cake here. Again, I'm going with the fine nib, and I'm just now going to add just a bit of brown colour to the trunk of the tree. But again, I'm not looking for every single piece of trunk. Just want to give that feeling of a bit of colour. So there's my brown trunk. And then I'm going to go with a light soft suede, and I'm going to colour in my hanging basket so it looks a bit like a wicker basket. And then we've got the wicker basket here on the front of the bike. I'm going to leave the bike as it is. You could put a coloured seat on if you wanted. But I'm going with the less is more, which is quite unusual for me, but there you go. I've got a light smoky slate. And I'm just going to colour in my pots down here. Like looks like a metal trough there. And we'll go with the same colour here. And then we just want to add some details of some flowers. So I've got Light Daffodil Delight here. So again, I'm just running that over the flowers in that basket. I think I'll have some pink, so some light polish pink. I think I'll have those on the bike, on the bicycle's basket. And then I think I'll stick with that, and I'll just fill this little bit in over here. And that is basically it. You could, and why not, you could add some Wink of Stella just to brighten it up a little bit. And then that is ready to just trim, or if you were going with the version where we made like a frame for it, then you would have a slightly longer piece of the white paper. So moving on to this one, again we've got some green leaves. I've got a light Calypso coral. I think I probably should have brought my darker one in. it will do. I'm looking for sort of a terracotta effect. Actually, no, that's fine. And then I'm just going to put old olive on here. Again, I'm not being too fussy. I'm trying to keep it within the lines of the stamped image, but I'm not literally slaving away to make sure I've got every single bit covered. I'm not going to worry about the stalks, and then perhaps we'll just go with the pink again. And I'm just going to put a tiny little blob of ink there on the top. And that is it. That's our inside image of the card. So I hope that's given you some ideas with that. And that is it really. I don't think there's going to be any more videos with Sale-A-Bration items, because we are only just a few days now before it finishes. So if there is something you've had your eye on, or something that I've featured, then please don't miss out. Please make sure you place your qualifying order before time runs out. I'll put a link to my shop as usual on the front, and also a link where you can have a look at what rewards there are during Sale-A-Bration. I'll also put a link to my blog and a link to join my team if you fancy becoming a demonstrator, if you fancy giving that a try, because there is also a really nice joining offer during Sale-A-Bration. So that's it. I will be back with something else in the not too distant future. Thank you ever so much for joining me. If you've enjoyed my video, then please do consider subscribing to my channel. I would really appreciate that. And it just means that you'll get notification when I've uploaded a new tutorial. So I will see you very soon, but until then, take care, look after yourselves, bye for now.